Chapter 201, 201 Klein held his breath with his back against the wall as he faced the darkness of the corridor. What's Captain doing? What's wrong with him? Was he drinking blood? Is this a sign of him losing control? Klein's mind was a mess, incapable of effective thought. Nearly 20 seconds later, Klein clenched his teeth. With the help of the control he had over his body as a clown, he silently made his way down the stairs. Later, he then intentionally took heavier footsteps and made his way back to the door of Madame Sharon's bedroom. Klein looked in to see the captain wrapping sealed artifact 3-0271 with the black cloth. His expression was serious, his face clean. It was as though what Klein had seen just now was only an illusion. Glancing sideways, Klein saw nothing abnormal with Kenley's body. It was the same as it had been. He inhaled and asked, "Captain, how am I going to confirm if those servants are still asleep? I can't make an accurate judgment just based on spirit vision alone. They'll have various emotional reactions due to their dreams which will be reflected in the color of their auras." Dunn Smith fiddled with the spirit medium mirror and was silent for a few seconds. He said with a raspy voice, "I'm sorry. I forgot about that. I've made too many mistakes tonight. There's no need for you to check, I'll confirm it." He lifted his hand and pressed his glabella, then he closed his eyes, allowing formless ripples to spread towards the first floor. It was crystal clear to a nightmare if anyone was asleep or not. Klein froze when he saw this. He looked down and bit at the insides of his lips. "Captain, were you really drawing me away just now? What are you doing? Do you know what you're doing?" He abruptly turned to look at the window, only to see the crimson moon hanging high in the sky, seemingly unchanged for thousands of years. After collecting himself, Klein used the cover of picking up his tarot cards, revolver, half-top hat, and other items to closely examine the corpses of Kenley and Madame Sharon. They maintained the same look as when they died, but their skin was turning pale at a rapid rate. They also had tinges of blue and black marks. "It's a little weird, they seem to be missing something. It's not something specific, but more of a feeling," Klein muttered to himself. He felt his hair stand on end due to the chilly wind blowing through the shattered window. At that moment, Dunn opened his eyes and said in a deep voice, "They're all still asleep, but some of them are close to waking up." "That's good, that's good." Klein looked at the captain, not knowing what he was saying. Dunn surveyed the surroundings and said, "Clean up the scene, then get someone from the nearest police station to come over. Oh, and make a trip back to Zutland Street and get Fry to come help out." Klein gave the captain a deep look and nodded with his teeth clenched. "Okay." With Dunn's help, Klein quickly cleaned up the scene and left Madame Sharon's house through the front door. Walking through the garden and coming outside, Klein couldn't help but look back. All he saw was the silent nursery in the darkness. There was no light at all. He turned, his heart heavy. He soon located the nearest police station based on his memory. This was common knowledge to the Nighthawks. Knock. 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 Klein knocked on the steel door. Sometime later, the officer on duty passed through the courtyard with a lantern in hand. He opened the door and observed Klein suspiciously. "What's the matter?" Klein failed to force any expression. With a heavy face, he produced his documents and showed it to the police officer. "There's a serious murder case at 15 Osna Street. Immediately call for other officers to head there to help out." The police officer lifted his lantern and scrutinized the documents before putting his feet together and saluted. "Yes, sir." Having settled this, Klein headed back to Zutland Street on a rental carriage. On the way back, he sat in the dark carriage. His thoughts were in a mess and unfocused. Kenley is dead, I remember that he was recently engaged. His parents are still alive. What was the captain doing just now? Does he crave fresh blood, or does he have other motives? His memory is still as poor as before, without any obvious improvement. This means that he doesn't have the warning signs of losing control. But he's known about the acting method for some time now. Does the fact that his memory hasn't improved mean that there's a problem? No. It must be because the captain is still figuring out the proper way to act as a nightmare. Yes, the most important reasons why Kenley died was because of sealed artifact 3-0271. It was the captain who gave it to him. What am I thinking? It was a logical decision back then. It was also the captain who suggested using sealed artifact 3-0271, calm down, I cannot make blind guesses. But I cannot wait around either, or the situation might worsen. I'll send a letter to Madame Daly later and see if she knows what this situation means. Even if she doesn't know the exact answer, she'll definitely understand the signs of danger and inform the Holy Cathedral. That way, we can smother the problem in the cradle and get the captain back to normal. No, the captain might not have a problem. I might have misunderstood something. I'll see what Madame Daly says. Klein had already made a decision when the carriage arrived at 36, Zutland Street. He was no longer flustered and helpless as before. He went up the stairway toward the entrance of the Blackthorn Security Company with heavy steps and opened the door from a key he fished out. The familiar setting calmed him down considerably. It reminded him of how he felt when he asked the captain for help every time something was wrong. Taking a deep breath, Klein went to the recreation room and found Fry reading alone under the gas lamp. Fry turned to look at Klein, his cold face revealing a look of concern and worry. Did something happen? Where's Captain and Kenley? Klein replied with a raspy voice, Kenley's dead. He died at Madame Sharon's hands. We all made mistakes. The captain is guarding the scene. He needs your help there. Before they left, the captain had informed Fry about the general situation. He told Fry that if they weren't back within 2 hours, he was to send a telegraph to the Holy Cathedral. Similarly, since they had to apply for sealed artifact 3-0271 and enter Cheney's Gate at night, Royale, who was guarding Cheney's Gate, was also notified of the mission. According to the internal guidelines of the Nighthawks, a captain could permit the opening of Cheney's Gate at night. If the captain was present, then only the captain could enter. Fry froze for a moment, then he let out a sigh. He drew a crimson moon on his chest. He put on his coat and hat and headed out the door. When he walked past Klein, he suddenly said softly, You don't need to blame yourself. Making mistakes is something we can never avoid. We must always trust our partners. Yeah. Klein closed his eyes, his vision turning blurry. Klein and Fry first headed to the basement to notify Royale before locking the door to the Blackthorn Security Company and rushing to Madame Sharon's house. It was nearing dawn by the time they got Kenley's corpse and Madame Sharon's half-decapitated body back. Dunn stood in front of the mortuary, silently looking inside. It was some time before he turned to Klein and said, Go home first. You just experienced an intense battle, you must be exhausted. All right. Klein didn't reject the suggestion. He puckered his lips and stole a glance at the captain before quietly leaving the Blackthorn Security Company. He took a carriage back to Daffodil Street. Just as he had done the previous time, he easily entered his bedroom and locked the door. Taking out the silver ritual dagger, Klein sealed the room with a wall of spirituality. He then sat at his desk and wrote urgently, Dear Madame Daly, I've noticed that there's something odd about the captain recently. During a mission, Klein stopped when he reached this point. His mind had gone blank. He didn't know how to continue or how to describe the incident. Pa! He threw the pen and crumpled the piece of paper in front of him into a ball. Looking at it, he pounded heavily on the table, sending a reverberating thump across the room. Klein closed his eyes and covered his face with his hands. He didn't move, as if he had become a statue. 5 minutes later, he sighed. He put down his right hand and burned the ball of paper with his spirituality. He watched it turn to ash as it fell into the bin. After organizing his thoughts, Klein took out a fresh piece of paper and wrote, Dear Madame Daly, we just completed a mission and regrettably lost a partner. The exact details are as follows. Back then, I felt that with my present standards, my spirit vision was incapable of accurately ascertaining whether the servants were asleep or not, and that it was very troublesome to do divinations for every one of them. Thus, I returned with the intention of asking for the captain's advice. At that moment, through the mirror's reflection, I saw the captain kneeling beside Kenley's corpse, with crimson blood covering his mouth. I'm not sure what exactly happened, nor do I know the state the captain is in. I hope that you can give me an answer. After writing this, Klein read the letter again with a heavy heart before folding it in half. He then set up a ritual and activated his spirit vision to summon Daly's messenger. He summoned the strange face which was only a mouth without any eyes or nose. He saw the red tongue laced with irregular sharp teeth and 5 pale fingers on the tip of the tongue. Klein silently handed the letter over. When everything was restored back to normal again, he sat down and continued writing. This time, he planned to ask Mr. Azik. On a recent mission, something strange happened to my superior. He sent me away and kneeled beside the corpse of a teammate. His mouth was covered in crimson blood. Have you encountered something like this in your memories before? How can I help my superior? Chapter 202. After folding the letter, Klein took out the copper whistle, put it to his lips, and blew hard. In the silence, illusory white bones came flying up from the desk like a fountain and finally formed a huge monster. It was almost 4 meters tall, still covered in a faint glow. Its head was still poking through the ceiling, looking no different from before. Klein flicked his wrist and threw the letter. The white bone monster caught the letter and gripped it tight. Klein blew the copper whistle again and saw the messenger break into illusory white bones and fall like rain before vanishing through the surface of the desk. Klein felt much calmer after finishing everything, but he didn't stop trying. He moved the chair back and stood up. He then walked 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the world above the gray fog. The lofty palace and the ancient model table appeared before his eyes, as though it would stay the same for tens of thousands of years. Klein sat at the fool's seat of honor. Then, he took out the spirit pendulum from his left sleeve and conjured a yellowish-brown goatskin and a fountain pen in front of him. He wanted to divine the captain's situation that night. After some thought, Klein wrote the first divination statement. Dunn Smith's abnormality would lead me into danger. In mysticism, divination that involved any danger to the diviner was hardest to interfere. It was an instinctual ability of spirituality. In other words, as long as there wasn't an extremely strong disturbance, Klein would be able to get an accurate result from the divination about his own situation. This was also the reason why he would divine if there was danger in the mission, even though he knew that Madame Sharon had the ability to interfere with divination. He also knew that Madame Sharon wasn't strong enough to affect this kind of divination. In order to determine Captain Dunn Smith's situation, he decided to eliminate all disturbances and perform the divination above the gray fog. He held the pendulum with his left hand as he recited the divination statement 7 times. He closed his eyes and entered a cogitation state. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes and they returned to their normal color. He looked at the topaz pendant, and he felt heavy-hearted because the pendulum was spinning clockwise. The rotation wasn't small, nor was the speed slow. It meant that the result was positive. It meant that Dunn Smith's abnormality would lead him to danger. And the danger level was significant. After he closed his eyes, Klein wiped away the previous content and wrote down a new divination statement. The reason for Dunn Smith's abnormality. He put away the topaz pendant and leaned back into the chair. He recited the divination statement as he entered a dream with the aid of cogitation. In the blurry illusory world, he couldn't see or discover anything. There was nothing except gray fog. That means that there was insufficient information, so the divination failed. Klein looked at the goatskin on the long bronze table as he muttered bitterly and helplessly. Suddenly, he felt a strong feeling of exhaustion. He realized that it was the result of an intense battle, continuous rituals, and multiple divinations. Klein wrapped himself up with spirituality and stimulated a rapid descent from above the gray fog and returned to reality. He had a few nightmares that night. The ending of each dream was either Kenley vomiting his organs, or Dunn Smith with crimson blood around his mouth. The next morning, Klein was on duty at Cheney's Gate, so he arrived early at the Blackthorn Security Company. At that very moment, Roseanne, Mrs. Oriana, and the other clerks had yet to arrive for work. Klein walked through the partition and saw the wide-open door and Dunn Smith, who was seated in the captain's office. Dunn had taken off his coat, and he only had his white shirt and black vest on. He sat in his seat while he held a cup of coffee in his hands. He was staring at the wall in front of him blankly. His hair seemed dry, his gray eyes looked dull, and his face was showing obvious signs of weariness too. Even for the captain, who's experienced many similar incidents, it's still unbearable to lose two teammates in such a short period of time. Klein's heart winced as the scene of the shattered full-body mirror reflecting Dunn kneeling before Kenley's corpse with his face covered in crimson blood appeared once again. Klein clenched his teeth and looked away. After nearly 20 seconds, he composed himself and extended his hand to knock on the captain's door. Knock. 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 Dunn put down his coffee cup as his gray eyes became deep again. He took a deep breath and said, "I've reported the matter to the Holy Cathedral," and they gave an initial reply. The church will compensate Kenley's family with £3,000, and the police department will give £1,000 as bereavement payment, a total of £4,000. To most middle-class citizens, that's wealth that can't be earned in a lifetime. Kenley's weekly salary was £7, making an annual income of £364. Adding in any bonuses and additional income, he would make at least £380. £4,000 is equivalent to 10 years of his income. Such wealth can provide at least £200 of income a year. Although money cannot make up for the loss of Kenley, it's the only effective thing at the moment. Klein had many thoughts passing through his mind before he finally sighed. That's all we can do. The Church of the Evernight Goddess couldn't be faulted when it came to such matters. Dunn pulled his collar and said in a deep voice, "Go to the basement and take over Royale's shift." "All right." Klein nodded slightly. He turned around and walked towards the door. Then, he heard Captain add as though he was talking to himself, "We'll send Kenley home later, send Kenley home. His father, his mother, his siblings, his fiancée, how will they react?" Klein's heart tightened, and he was somehow glad that he didn't have to face such sorrow. He knew it was the mentality of an escapist, but he was really afraid of seeing the agony in the eyes of Kenley's parents, or how his fiancée would seem to lose her soul. He was afraid to see their expressions of hidden resentment and afraid of hearing their sobbing. Klein quickened his pace and hurried to Cheney's Gate. He completed the shift change with Royale in silence. He sat in the duty room and occasionally took out his silver pocket watch and watched the time pass by slowly. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly heard illusory sounds that overlapped one another. He saw the 4 black dots appear on the back of his hand and understood that it was either Justice, the hanged man, or the sun praying to him. He had no way to answer them immediately. He could only wait till the notification ended, for more prayers to come, and until the next morning when he returned home. Having just fished his keys to open the door to his house, Klein saw the maidservant Bella wiping the dining table while his sister, Melissa, who was dressed up, and his brother, Benson, came downstairs. "Didn't you just go to Mass last week?" Klein asked curiously. Benson smiled and said, "That sounds like the memory of a person who hasn't gotten any sleep the entire night." "Huh?" Klein looked even more confused. "Today is the first day that, the Return of the Count will be releasing tickets for sale," Melissa explained. Klein smacked his forehead and took off his hat. "I've been too busy recently. I totally forgot about it. Especially these past 3 days." He added with a sigh. Melissa looked at him with concern and said, "Your breakfast is in the kitchen. Eat it and get some sleep." Benson and I thought that since we're going out, we might as well drop by St. Selena Cathedral to have Mass. All right. Klein waved and bade his brother and sister farewell. He had a simple breakfast and returned to his bedroom. After he did the preparatory work, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and entered the world above the grey fog. He saw that justice and the hanged man's corresponding crimson stars were burgeoning and shrinking faintly. He extended his right hand and emanated his spirituality. Then, blurry images formed before Klein's eyes. Miss Justice's prayer sounded in his ears. I pray for you to listen. Because of the Kalangos incident, my father hired a beyonder to protect me. There are also others who are watching over me secretly. It wasn't easy for me to finally find an opportunity to pray to you. I would like to apply for leave from the gathering next week. I believe this will pass soon. Klein subconsciously glanced at the blurry image. The image was filled with fog, and there seemed to be a huge bathtub with rippling water. Miss Justice was wrapped in a bath towel. He retracted his gaze and started listening to the hanged man's prayer. His description was different from Justice's, but he was making the same request. He too needed to ask for leave due to the aftermath of Kalangos' death. Klein nodded slightly and responded to their prayers respectively. I'm aware. Then, he sent a message to the sun's crimson star. The upcoming gathering will be cancelled temporarily. City of Silver. Derek Berg was paying attention in the training field. The sky above his head was still dark, with occasional flashes of lightning that lit up the sky. Suddenly, his vision went blurry before he saw the thick fog and the ancient palace that looked like the home of a giant. He also saw Mr. Fool, who sat in the depths of the grey fog. The upcoming gathering will be cancelled temporarily. His voice reverberated, but the view before Derek had already returned to normal. He wasn't shocked at such a magical incident because Mr. Fool contacted him in this manner to remind him before every gathering. Derek looked up at the woman in front of him subconsciously, a member of the City of Silver's 6-member council, Shepherd Lovia. This terrifying expert kept switching between a smile and being aloof. She told every young man at the training field that they would join the patrolling troop soon and rid the dark monsters in the vicinity. That wouldn't be training anymore. Elder Lovia didn't notice anything strange. She seems to be getting weirder. Is it because there's a high-sequence Beyonder's evil spirit among the souls that she grazes? Derek thought. Klein returned to his bedroom, threw himself into bed, and quickly fell asleep. He dreamed about what had happened these past few days. Suddenly, he felt like he was being shaken by someone, and he suddenly woke up. Klein opened eyes and saw a gigantic white bone hand. The hand paused and threw the letter on the bed. Then, it vanished into thin air. Mr. Isaac's reply. Klein grabbed the letter, full of hope. Chapter 203, 203 Klein opened the letter, feeling both expectant and nervous before he began reading Isaac's reply. I thought about a few possibilities regarding the scenario you described, and I remembered a few things about vampires and mutants. Natural vampires were already on the brink of extinction before the dragons and giants bowed out of the stage of world history. Later on, they might occasionally be discovered. The vampires we usually talk about, as well as those mentioned in folklore, are more similar to Beyonders. I recall that the name of a potion in a particular pathway is called vampire. If your superior is now in a half-insane state, then it's very likely that he mistakenly consumed such a potion. The result of mixing 2 potions from different pathways makes a half-insane state a certainty. Yes, I vaguely remember the pathway of the Evernight, which is also the sleepless pathway as you know it, can be interchanged at high sequences with the pathway of death and the pathway of giants. But it doesn't include the vampire pathway. Of course, we cannot rule out the possibility that your superior might have accepted it willingly. After all, vampires have a long life, an exceptional constitution, and excellent looks. When compared with these benefits, accepting a state of half-insanity is reasonable. Klein froze when he read the letter. He didn't expect Mr. Isaac to provide him with this much information. The death pathway is also known as the corpse collector pathway. It can be interchanged at high sequences with the sleepless pathway. I knew about this from Emperor Rosel's diary. But to think that it can also be interchanged with the giant pathway after sequence 4. The giant pathway is the one that the City of Silver possesses, which is also the present-day god of combat pathway. I've always suspected that giant King Ormur was the ancient god of combat. Yes, Emperor Rosel's diary described the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Combat as mortal enemies. Could this be because the pathways they possess can be interchanged at higher sequences? If I follow this line of thought, I can find an explanation as to why the three ancient churches, the Church of the Lord of Storms, the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, are at odds with each other. That's because the pathways of Sailor, Bard, and Reader can be interchanged at high sequences. Yes, during the end of the previous epoch, the Pale Era, it's likely that the fall of death was caused by the Evernight Goddess and the God of Combat. The captain is perfectly fine usually, other than his poor memory. He doesn't show any signs of half-insanity. I can rule out the possibility of him consuming the vampire potion. Mr. Isaac has recalled quite a number of things recently. Could the creeping hunger have really stimulated his memories? Klein nodded and continued reading the letter. Mutant isn't the name of a particular species. It's more like the description for many similar creatures. Under normal circumstances, they're no different from an ordinary human, but there is an innate, suppressed, twisted desire in their hearts. This desire erupts when they come into contact with a certain scene or object. They become monsters, succumbing to their desires for blood and massacre. After everything settles, they will return to normal again. They become slightly more merciless and unfeeling after each time their desires erupt. This will continue until their souls are completely twisted. The only example of this that I can recall is the werewolf. They're similar to humans for the most part, and they cannot be distinguished using most beyonder abilities. But, during the full moon, the twisted desires in their hearts intensify, and their bodies also change accordingly. Your superior might be a potential mutant. The death of your teammate might have triggered his true nature. These are all my personal guesses. I cannot guarantee that there are no other possibilities since I haven't gotten all my memories back. Perhaps your theory of this being a precursor to losing control can also explain this. There's no saving him whether he has consumed the vampire potion, or if he's a mutant. Of course, many people have theorized that mutants were originally ordinary human beings, but were put under a strange curse or corrupted by some evil god or devil, and, thus, transform into a different monster under certain circumstances. Also, I'm not too sure if you can treat him when you notice the warning signs of losing control. I would advise that you report this directly to your superior and hope that there's still time. Klein looked gravely at the desk after placing the letter down. He slipped into deep thought. He had to admit that the theory of a mutant was a very possible one, but he couldn't eliminate the possibility that it was a warning sign to him losing control. All I can do is wait for Madame Daly's reply. I sent the letter 2 nights ago, so she should have received the letter yesterday morning. If she replied immediately, I should have seen the letter last night or this morning. It's almost noon. Does that messenger not dare to go near Cheney's gate? Or was Madame Daly held up by something? Klein shook his head. He still felt exhausted and used cogitation to force himself to sleep. In the hazy world, Klein was suddenly jolted to his senses. He knew that he was dreaming. He then saw Dunn Smith in his black windbreaker appear in front of him. Responding in a manner congruent with a normal dream, Klein gave a delayed greeting, "Good morning." "Captain," Dunn nodded slightly and said, "Leonard found a clue when he was investigating the Lenivus case. He needs your help. The mystery prior that the Holy Cathedral sent over won't arrive until tomorrow morning because of a train fault." "All right," Klein replied in a fleeting voice. Dunn thought for a moment before adding, "There's no need for you to return to Zutland Street. Head to 62, House Street directly. Leonard will be there waiting for you. It's been hard on you." The moment he finished his sentence, Klein's dream shattered. Klein instinctively opened his eyes. House Street. Isn't that the area where the Divination Club, my classmate Welch, and the member of the Aurora Order lived? There sure are many incidents lately, one after another, as if they're culminating in something. Klein thought as he got up slowly. He washed up in the bathroom before changing into a white shirt, brown vest, and black windbreaker. He then picked up his hat and went down to the living room. It wasn't 11 yet, and Benson and Melissa hadn't returned home. Klein informed Bella that he was going out and that she didn't need to prepare lunch for him. He then took a public carriage to House Street and saw the messy-haired midnight poet, Leonard Mitchell, whose hair exuded beauty, waiting for him in at Building 62. Leonard was still in a thin white shirt despite the chilly September weather. He had paired it with beige pants. He swept his green eyes at Klein. This might be the building rented by Lenevis under a false name. "How did you figure it out?" Klein asked out of curiosity. Leonard pointed to his head. "Since you found a clue from Hood Eugen and suspected that Lenevis was likely connected to that member of the Aurora Order, the cloth merchant Sirius Arapis, I had to change my line of thinking after my normal investigations revealed nothing. I started investigating the Aurora Order. The previous report told me that Sirius had interactions with many of the residents on House Street, so I searched every one of them and found a problem with this one." "What problem?" Klein asked. Leonard raised his brows. "An obvious problem. The guest here appears very rarely. He claimed to be going to the southern continent to do business after Hannes Vincent's death and never returned. His records are very realistic, and the police didn't discover anything. This could only be a coincidence." Klein creased his brows. "Of course, a coincidence. But when I showed the residents around here Lenevis's picture, an old man felt that he looked similar to the resident at number 62, other than his different glasses." Leonard took out a black and white photograph from his pocket. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Klein lampooned inwardly. He entered 62, House Street with Leonard, and at Leonard's request, he started to divine if there were any hidden compartments or secret chambers. The result was yes. The secret chamber or hidden compartment in this building. Klein wrote down another divination statement. He took a seat on the sofa and closed his eyes as he recited the statement. 7 times later, he entered a dream. His vision was blurry. In the blurry world, Klein saw a wooden bookshelf. He saw rows upon rows of books. He saw that one of the books had been taken away. He saw the wooden surface beside the book open, revealing a hidden compartment. The scene quickly disappeared as Klein opened his eyes and told Leonard, in the study. Klein wound the topaz pendulum around his wrist and followed Leonard into the study. He saw the wooden bookshelf he had seen in his dream. "Pull out that book, the place it's covering has a hidden compartment." Klein pointed at the book nearest to the sides. "So it's here. I couldn't find anything when I searched the place, and I had no choice but to return to Zutland Street to request for help," Leonard grumbled as he walked over. He pulled out the book Klein had pointed out. After searching the area, he finally found the mechanism to open the hidden compartment. A letter lay silently in the hidden compartment. A letter? Lenevis hid a letter here. Klein found it extremely strange. After he divined to see if there was anything dangerous within the letter and received a negative answer, Leonard picked up the letter and opened the unmarked envelope. Leonard pulled out the letter within and unfolded it. Klein leaned forward to get a look of its contents. All he saw were the first few paragraphs of the letter. "Ha ha ha, congratulations. Congratulations on finally finding this letter. This means that you're not too stupid, nor too slow. You qualify to take part in this game of life and death that I've designed. Child laborers that die before their time. Factory workers who seldom live past 10 years after entering the factory because of their working conditions. Female workers who risk severe illnesses for a meager salary. I see boundless resentment surrounding every factory, turning the surroundings oppressive and gloomy. This is the worst of times, and also the best of times. Our game shall take place under such a setting. Fools, prepare yourselves, I'm going to issue you a hint. Chapter 204. Klein and Leonard lifted their gaze from the letter and exchanged glances. They muttered, "He's crazy, right? Leonidas is secretly a lunatic. A lunatic who truly has a delusional disorder and an antisocial personality." Klein thought and felt a tug at his heartstrings. He quickly redirected his gaze to the letter. "Ladies and gentlemen, the hint is that I've placed a bomb in Tianjin, a bomb that will grow stronger over time. Seek it and finish it before it explodes. If you lose the game, there will be a boom, and the entire city of Tianjin will be reduced to a ruin. Trust me, I'm not lying at all about this. Leonidas, who enjoys giving his friends pleasant surprises." "A bomb?" Klein looked at Leonard and muttered to himself, perplexed. Leonard held the letter up to the sunlight and looked as he flipped it around. He didn't find any other clues. The term bomb is probably an expression. I've never heard of a bomb that can grow stronger. Klein creased his eyebrows and said thoughtfully, "No, I mean, he might be using bomb to reference something in mysticism. Such as an evil ritual that continuously accumulates power." Leonard cocked his head as though he was listening to something when suddenly, his facial expression grew solemn. He nodded as his green eyes constricted. "Maybe you're right. Isn't there a description at the beginning of the letter? Child laborers that die before their time, factory workers who seldom live past 10 years after entering the factory because of their working conditions, female workers who risk severe illnesses for a meager salary. Boundless resentment surrounding every factory. Perhaps, that might be the energy source that constantly strengthens Leonidas's bomb. Yes, that's very possible." Klein suddenly tensed up and said, "We need to report to the captain immediately." Leonard laughed and said, "There's no need to be so nervous. You should know that Leonidas is a swindler." The part where he said that he didn't lie might be a lie itself. "Of course, regardless, we have to return to Zutland Street to report to the captain. It's best if we can request the Holy Cathedral to send a mysticism expert over and find the location of the altar through the abnormal accumulation of resentment. Someone is apparently very familiar with protocol. But why would the setup of such an altar need Eugen's help? What role does a psychiatrist play in this?" Klein didn't object to the idea. He left 62 House Street with Leonard and rushed back to Zutland Street on a hired carriage. Just as they entered the Blackthorn Security Company's door, Klein saw two familiar faces, one voluptuous and one scrawny. They were Maynard's wife and sister. They were still in black dresses and black hats. The fine checkered black gauze concealed their faces. The two ladies were chatting with Roseanne, and when they suddenly saw Klein's return, they turned around and walked forward. "You really are the cream of the crop in this industry, Mrs." Maynard nodded slightly and said in a low voice, "I'm very pleased with the outcome and am also impressed with your work approach. Here's the reward that you deserve." The scrawny woman passed a light brown paper bag to Klein. It was filled with thick stacks of cash. There were 10-pound notes, 5-pound notes, 1-pound notes, and also 5 soldi and 1 soldi. "It's a total of 230 pounds, the scrawny lady stated simply. Klein was in no mood to pay any attention to the money. He passed it to Roseanne and said, "Take this to Mrs. Oriana." I doubt the two respectable women would make a mistake counting the money. At that moment, the corner of his eyes caught the Tianjin City Honest paper in Mrs. Maynard's hands. On the most eye-catching spot on the front page, there were two pieces of news. Old Baron's widow dies in involvement with MP Maynard's murder. Mayor Dennis takes the blame for the worsening public security in Tianjin for the past 3 months and resigns. So that's the official excuse for Madame Sharon's case. I've yet to read the newspaper today. Klein nodded at the two ladies and followed Leonard through the partition to the captain's office. How was it? Did you find any clues? Dunn Smith closed his document, lifted his head, and looked at Klein and Leonard with his deep gray eyes. We found a letter that was left behind by Lenivas. Leonard didn't provide any further descriptions and simply passed the captain the letter filled with madness and provocation. Dunn opened the letter and scanned through it quickly. He rubbed his temples as he said, "He really is a lunatic. He's only a sequence 8, sequence 7 at most." Klein agreed from the bottom of his heart. Lenivas is a dangerous figure who can damage the stability of social order. Even though he's weak, we can't belittle him. Then, he told Captain about his and Leonard's assumption. Dunn touched his receding hairline as he said, "That was my thought as well. I'll immediately send a telegram to the Holy Cathedral and ask them to send a mysticism expert over for assistance. Who knows how dangerous Lenivas's bomb could be? We have to be extremely careful. When the Holy Cathedral replies to me, I'll arrange for the follow-up." Klein and Leonard exchanged glances and nodded simultaneously as they said, "All right." Seizing the moment when Captain was sending a telegram to the Holy Cathedral, Klein returned to the reception hall to grab a copy of the Tianjin City Honest paper from Roseanne. He stood at the partition and read the two articles with full concentration. The widow of the old baron of the Coe family, Madame Sharon, was suspected to be involved in the sudden death of Member of Parliament Maynard. The police received a tip and took action at night. They discovered that Madame Sharon and her accomplice had knocked out her servants to carry out a pagan ceremony in her bedroom. They refused to surrender and attempted to resist arrest, resulting in the death of a heroic police officer. Finally, Madame Sharon and her accomplice paid the price for their evil deeds with their lives. Mayor Dennis takes the blame for the worsening public security in Tianjin and resigns. He also announced that he wouldn't be running for re-election next year. For the next few months, Deputy Mayor Mr. Harry will take on the responsibilities of mayor. A heroic police officer. Is that the description of Kenley? Klein sighed and knew that it was the best way of handling the situation. According to the internal rules of the Nighthawks, in order to prevent the forces of evil from taking revenge on their family members, their names would be kept confidential even if they sacrificed their lives. He folded the newspaper quietly and returned it to the reception desk. Klein suddenly saw a visitor who walked through the entrance. She was a young lady, in her 20s at most. She was in a ruffled hat and loose dress. She had lovely facial features, blonde hair, green eyes, and also a depressed yet silent temperament. She was quite a beauty. The most eye-catching thing about her was her stomach that bulged out. She looked like she was more than 7 months pregnant. Klein was stunned, and he felt that he had seen the young pregnant lady before. Suddenly, he heard Leonard say in surprise, "Miss Megos." Megos. Yes, the young lady who was conned by Lenivas. She's pregnant with Lenivas's child, and as such, there might be something wrong with her mental health. She says her child sings in her stomach and also whistles. Klein was suddenly enlightened and he wasn't surprised that Leonard knew Megos. When they relaunched the investigations of people related to Lenivas, the lady's photo had been seen by every Nighthawk. Klein knew her even earlier. Her Aunt Christina, whose savings had been conned by Lenivas, had brought her to the divination club to ask for help. Her aunt even asked if the child in her stomach could be used for divination. Then, as Megos heard Leonard's voice, she looked over at the both of them vacantly and replied politely, "Hello. Miss Megos, what brings you here to the Blackthorn Security Company? Do you have anything that you'd like us to do for you?" Klein took 2 steps forward and asked. He was very confused by Megos' sudden visit. He felt it was an extreme coincidence. We just found Lenivas's letter, and Megos comes visiting. Megos touched her stomach and smiled faintly. Somehow or other, I suddenly thought of coming to Zutland Street and suddenly thought of coming up to take a look. Her mental health seems to have worsened. Klein recalled that he hadn't managed to activate his spirit vision and check on Migos' situation previously. Hence, he lifted his teeth and was about to tap his left molars. Just then, a series of thoughts screamed through his head in increasing intensity. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. You'll die. You'll die if you look. You'll die if you look. Klein stood rooted on the spot like a statue as his forehead was covered in cold sweat. It was like having a deep and heavy nightmare that he nearly couldn't wake up from. Suddenly, he understood something. He had failed to activate his spirit vision the last time because his spirituality had noticed an unimaginable danger. It slowed him down subconsciously, so he missed the opportunity and forgot the follow-up. At that point, Klein had yet to digest the seer potion entirely, and he had yet to advance to sequence 8, so the warnings of spirituality were very subtle and difficult to notice. But now, Klein's spiritual foresight was so clear and obvious. After nearly 20 seconds, Klein finally shook off his paralysis. He looked sideways at Leonard and realized that the midnight poet was also covered in cold sweat, and his eyes were filled with horror. Suddenly, Klein understood what the bomb Lenivis was referring to. It's the baby in Migos' stomach. It's the baby that he left behind. Klein suddenly associated the description in the letter with Hood Eugen's answers, and he suddenly remembered something that he read in Emperor Roselle's diary. I started the Industrial Revolution with my own hands and personally ushered in the age of steam and machinery, but this will only become the hotbed for the descent of an evil god upon this world. Klein's pupils constricted as he thought of a possibility that he instinctually refused to admit. No. That's not right. The baby in Migos' stomach can't be the son of some evil god or an evil god waiting to descend upon the world. No. Why would Hood Eugen do such a silly thing? Although his psychiatrist power can help Lenivis fool Migos and use her as a spawning vessel in her semi-unconscious state, no. The resentment of child laborers that die before their time, and the factory workers and female workers who live less than 10 years aren't helping the son of an evil god to grow rapidly. No. Why you may not look directly at God. Chapter 205, 205 Klein instinctively reached for his pockets. He held the flaring sun charm in one hand and Azek's copper whistle in the other. He acutely noticed that the cold, gentle beyonder feedback of the latter had vanished as if it was being suppressed by an invisible power. However, the former was still warm and comforting. Making use of this comforting feeling, Klein entered a half-cogitation state. He blocked out his feelings of worry and didn't leave anything to chance. He turned and shot a look at Leonard Mitchell, then tipped his chin toward Migos. He then controlled his expression with his clown abilities and smiled at Migos. Do you want coffee, black tea, or nothing at all? Migos stroked her stomach as if she was listening to something. A cup of warm water. I suddenly thought of chatting with you guys about Lenivis. I have the feeling that you know a lot. Who told you that? Leonard was no longer the frivolous guy that he usually was. His smile had turned rather stiff. Migos suddenly giggled. My child told me. He knows a lot. He's very smart. Klein fought back the urge to curse. He turned to the partition and signaled to Leonard to keep Migos calm. Leonard forced a smile and pointed toward the sofa. That's exactly what I'd like to talk about. We want to have a chat with you about Lenivis. Behind the receptionist desk, Roseanne looked on in confusion. She suddenly realized that she didn't need to do anything. Klein quickly made his way past the partition and directly pushed open the door to Dunn Smith's office, then closed the door with a bang. He saw Dunn looking shocked before turning serious and saying in a heavy voice, Captain, something serious has happened. I know what Lenivis meant by bomb. Dunn stood up and pointed outside. Migos? He had obviously heard Leonard's shocked exclamation, but he was unable to see the looks of fear and cold sweat on his teammates' faces. Klein nodded and explained quickly, I tried to activate my spirit vision to observe Megos to ascertain her mental condition, but my spirituality stopped me from making the attempt. It kept warning me not to look, that I would die if I did so. This made me recall a saying, "You may not look directly at God." Even if the fetus in Megos' stomach isn't an evil god attempting to descend upon this world, or the spawn of an evil god, it's definitely a legendary creature. Captain, connecting this to the Black Altar in Hood Eugen's memories, to his psychiatrist abilities, to the tragic world as described in Lenivas's letter, I think that my guess is quite close to the truth. Lenivas obtained a ritualistic magic linked to the true creator from an Aurora Order member. With Hood Eugen's help, he turned Megos into a vessel to gestate a certain power. Then, this power will make use of the resentment, oppression, and gloominess surrounding the factories to quickly grow until maturity. In other words, the ritual itself needs this resentment, oppression, and gloominess in order to succeed. Dunn considered Klein's words seriously for nearly 20 seconds before nodding with a solemn expression. "I'll ask for assistance from the Holy Cathedral immediately. Let's hope that the baby in Megos' stomach can still wait. Of course, we can't just sit back and do nothing. Tell Leonard to keep Megos calm and keep her company. Notify Mrs. Oriana, Roseanne, and the rest. Get all the non-combatants to evacuate. I'll head to the back of Cheney's gate after I send the telegram. We have to prepare for the worst, which is if Megos' baby is born before the arrival of reinforcements from the Holy Cathedral. As captain of the Tinjan Nighthawks, I have the authority to use Saint Selena's ashes during emergencies." Saint Selena's ashes. The ashes of a high-sequence beyonder. The core seals within Cheney's gate. Klein's worries eased a little. He quickly thought of other things. "Captain, we can also ask for reinforcements from the mandated Punishers and the machinery hive mind, they should have similar holy items." Klein suddenly had a stroke of inspiration as he muttered to himself, Lenivas's case was originally under the purview of the mandated Punishers. Old Neil and I were there to help when one of their senior members lost control. As he spoke softly, his voice grew to a crescendo. "Captain, can you ask the mandated Punishers if the member who lost control was tracking or keeping Megos under surveillance? Are you suspecting that he lost control because he got corrupted by the baby in Megos' stomach? They were responsible for Megos when the investigation was happening." Dunn answered seriously. "We cannot delay any further. Go to Mrs. Oriana and the rest. I'll take this time to send a telegram to first ask for assistance from the Holy Cathedral, then I'll inform the mandated Punishers and the machinery hive mind. Yes, I'll also have to send a telegram to the police department and see if they can come up with an excuse to evacuate the citizens nearby." "All right." Klein had taken a few steps out of the room when he suddenly recalled something. He thought about the coincidence of Megos' sudden visit. The image of the building with the red chimney appeared in his mind. He turned around quickly and said to Dunn, "Captain, one more thing. Do you remember the coincidences I told you about? The clue to the Antigonus family's notebook in the house opposite the kidnapping, Ray Bieber who didn't make it out of Tinjan in time, Hannes Vincent exposing himself because of a coincidence, and how a member of the Aurora Order lost his life because he chanced upon me, etc. All these coincidences are very subtle and hard to detect, but the fact that Megos suddenly came looking for us right after we discovered Lenivas's letter is too obvious and direct. This coincidence was already laid bare before us, it's no longer hidden. I think that the person behind this will soon take center stage. Also, why would Madame Sharon take the risk in killing Member of Parliament Maynard? Is this also a coincidence?" Dunn thought about it and gave a solemn reply, "I'll include this point in the telegram." Klein didn't waste any more time. He exited the office and went straight for the accountant's room on the opposite side. Mrs. Oriana was preparing the budget for the last 3 months of the year. She wanted to complete it in advance just in case the captain forgot about it again. When she saw Klein enter, she greeted him with a smile. "Lad, what claims do you have to submit today?" Klein exhaled. Mrs. Oriana, we will be on vacation today. Go back home immediately. Oriana froze for a while, looking at the serious face before her in a daze. A few seconds later, she stood up in a fluster. All right. Klein added in a hurry, help me inform the rest of the clerks in the office and the armory. I'll inform Roseanne. Yes. Oriana didn't even pack. She grabbed her handbag and hurried out of the accounting office. She turned and stared at Klein after entering the corridor. She drew a crimson moon near her chest and said, all of you will be blessed by the goddess. Thank you. Klein replied in silence. He made his way past the partition into the receptionist area only to see Leonard chatting with Megos about Lenivis, his expression rigid. Klein leaned toward Roseanne as he filled up a cup of warm water. He then whispered, go home, it's dangerous here. Come back tomorrow. Roseanne opened her mouth in shock but closed it again after seeing Klein's stern expression. She lowered her head and packed for about 10 seconds before picking up her bag and leaving the receptionist area. Just as she was walking past Klein, she bit on her lip and whispered, to be honest, I respect the Nighthawks as much as I hate other people who become Beyonders. After seeing the clerks evacuate the Blackthorn Security Company, Klein brought warm water to Megos, bent his back, and placed it on the table in front of her. I have something to settle, I'll be back soon. As he stood up, he took the opportunity to lean in towards Leonard's ear and whispered, keep her here. Leonard clenched his teeth and widened his mouth into a grin. He continued his conversation with Megos and noticed that Megos was getting a little restless, as though she was losing her focus. Klein returned to the captain's office, only to realize that Dunn had already gone underground. There was a telegram on the table. It was the reply from the mandated punishers. Yes. We will be there immediately. Yes. The mandated punisher did lose control because of Megos. Klein couldn't calm himself down as he made his way to the corridor. He didn't know if he was waiting for the captain to retrieve the holy ashes or for reinforcements to arrive. I wonder if high-sequence Beyonders can teleport. I don't think so. He paced around a few times, suddenly feeling peaceful. He saw that the gas lamps on both sides of the corridor were now dyed a faint blue. Amid the darkness, Dunn followed the stairs into the corridor. In his palm was a square, palm-sized box of ashes. This box looked as though it was made out of pure silver, but it also felt like it was human bones. It was carved with many mysterious patterns. Klein felt colder the closer he was to the box, it was as if the cold was rapidly seeping into his blood. Dunn's face was bathed in an icy blue light. He told Klein, go to Cheney's Gate and pick out a sealed artifact with the highest offensive ability. Decide exactly which one with your own judgment. I've already told Sika and the keepers inside. Take note of the hidden threats. Of those, there are 3 Grade 2 sealed artifacts, which are, now that I've taken out the ashes of Saint Selena, Sika and the keepers cannot leave their positions now. At this point, Fry and Royale were both at Kenley's house for the funeral preparations. The Archbishop at St. Selena Cathedral had gone to the countryside to preach. All right. Klein didn't hesitate, immediately turning towards the basement. When he was nearing the intersection, Klein suddenly stopped. He knew that most of the sealed artifacts behind Cheney's Gate at Tingen City were Grade 3 and wouldn't have much of an effect on the baby in Megos' stomach. It was, at the very least, a legendary creature. The mutated Sun Sacred Emblem might work, but it takes too long to have an effect. It's unsuitable for this. There are only 3 Grade 2 sealed artifacts in Tingen City, and they're all very dangerous artifacts that can easily result in my death. I estimate their powers to be about the same as my Flaring Sun Charm, so I cannot have too many reservations later. I'll use the Flaring Sun Charm without any hesitation. It would definitely be as powerful as a Grade 2 sealed artifact, after all, it has the power of divine blood in it. Klein's mind whirled as he nodded indiscernibly. He felt for the Flaring Sun Charm and Azek's copper whistle in his pocket, but he was surprised to find that the sensation of the latter was back. Regardless of whether it was useful or not, Klein took out a pen and paper set that was used for divination and wrote a short message. The person who made my fate disharmonious and stole the skull of your child has appeared. He has arranged for Megos to enter the Blackthorn Security Company at 36, Zutland Street. It's highly likely that Megos is harboring the son of an evil god. The situation is very urgent. He put away his pen and folded the piece of paper. Klein took out the copper whistle at the intersection and blew, then watched the giant skeleton messenger appear before him. Chapter 206. In the corridor within the deep and serene basement, the nearly 4-meter-tall bone messenger disappeared before Klein's eyes after taking the letter. When all that was left of the surroundings were the classic gas lamps embedded in the walls, he put away Isaac's copper whistle and walked towards Cheney's gate. As he was writing the letter, he had already decided on which sealed artifact to pick. Firstly, it would be almost impossible for the grade 3 sealed artifacts to have any effect on the baby in Megos' stomach. Unless it was an item like the mutated sun's sacred emblem which had hidden powers. But, at that very moment, in such a situation, Klein wasn't in the mood to explore or research a secret that might or might not exist. Plus, most sealed artifacts would carry a certain level of danger for the user. So, Klein eliminated the grade 3 sealed artifacts that would weaken the user without affecting the enemy. Secondly, the Tinjin Nighthawks didn't have any grade 1 sealed artifacts and only 3 grade 2 artifacts. That was originally a secret that Klein wasn't allowed to know, but due to the urgency of the situation, Dunn made use of an emergency clause and told him the general situation. Dunn Smith couldn't hold any other sealed artifacts at the same time while holding St. Selena's ashes. And behind the Tinjin City's Cheney's gate, there were 3 grade 2 sealed artifacts, 2-030, 2-078, and 2-105. The name of 2-030 was Inexhaustible Poison. It originated from a Beyonder with an unknown sequence name who suddenly went mad and cut his wrist to commit suicide. He let his blood flow into an ordinary silver cup. But when his blood ran dry, the silver cup wasn't filled, and the liquid in the cup became crystal clear and alluring. It was a temptation that even a sequence 5 Beyonder had failed to resist. After he drank the liquid, he died of poisoning on the spot. After the person died, the poison seeped out through his pores and pooled together again. Its volume was the same as before he drank it. Not one bit less. Dunn said that the researchers in the Holy Cathedral suspected that the poison could kill a high-sequence Beyonder. However, the question lay within the fact that it was almost impossible for a high-sequence Beyonder to be tempted to drink it. Furthermore, the traits of 2-030 were obvious, so no one would consume it by accident. If one wanted to poison them, they had to first capture them, seize control of them, and then force it down their throat. But then, why go through the trouble? 2-030 would constantly tempt the living things around it to drink it. The user had to be fully focused on resisting its power. Any slight negligence would make one drink the poison as though it was only natural to do so. When Dunn finished his description, Klein decided, almost instantly, to not pick that sealed artifact. The name of 2-078 was Door of Death. Its appearance was like a normal wooden door. Any living thing that passed through it would die instantly. No high-sequence Beyonder had ever participated in the test. It possessed living traits and constantly attempted to escape. It could change its appearance and disguise itself into pre-existing doors. If the user made any mistakes, he would lose control of it. Then, he would need to be careful and not pass through any door near him. He would have to try to wait at the original spot for help or break through a wall to escape. Klein thought of using 2-078, but after re-evaluating the latter two, he felt that the intuition of a legendary creature would be very sharp and would be able to differentiate whichever door was the door of death. In the end, he decided to pick 2-105. The name of the sealed artifact was Blood Vessel Thief. It looked like a thick, stiffened blood vessel. Anyone who touched it, regardless of whether they were protected or not, would have their life stolen. In the beginning, it wouldn't be obvious. But, if one didn't break contact with it, the effects would be visible half an hour later. Dunn said that a Sequence 5 heretic held onto it for 2 hours. He turned from a brawny man in his 30s into a hunched old man who had loose skin, thin white hair, and missing teeth. The most important trait of 2 to 105 was that the person wearing it would have the chance to steal an ability from a target within a specific range. Even high-sequence Beyonders could be robbed of their abilities, but the probability was smaller. Within a 10-minute time period, the person who was robbed would lose the corresponding ability while the person who wore the item would be able to use the ability skillfully. 10 minutes later, the ability would vanish, and the person who was robbed would need to wait a couple of days to recover. Regardless of whether it works or not, it will at least raise the probability of success from 5% to 10%. I'm the king of yellow and black who wields good luck, after all. Besides, our main goal is just to take precautions and make preparations to deal with the worst-case scenario. We won't necessarily have to take action. Hopefully, reinforcements will arrive soon. Klein stopped outside the duty room, showing no signs of hesitation anymore. About the negative effects of sealed artifact 2 to 105, he wasn't worried because he wasn't planning to use the artifact himself. His plan was to give it to Leonard, as he already had the Flaring Sun charm and Azek's copper whistle, who he had no idea if it would still be suppressed. My dear poet, it's time for you to show your true secret. Klein muttered and saw Sikatron standing by the duty room. With her white hair and black eyes, the part-time author remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Why don't you guard Cheney's gate? I'm stronger and more experienced than you. But you don't have Flaring Sun charms." Klein replied with a smile, "Madam, I'm already a Sequence 8. It wouldn't be safe here either. There are many sealed artifacts that possess living traits that are itching to take action. Well, if we fail, the people here will definitely not survive. Heh, our goal upstairs is to buy time and wait for reinforcements. It might be safer than being around Cheney's gate." Sikatron puckered her lips slowly and drew a crimson moon on her chest. "May the goddess bless all of you." As Dunn didn't have the time to write the document in time, Klein couldn't enter Cheney's gate directly. All he did was watch Sikatron push open a tiny crack and enter. After a few minutes, she appeared by the door, and she was holding a thick, blood-tainted, pale blood vessel in her left hand. Klein extended his hand to take it, and he immediately felt a faint current surging in his body. In the reception hall of the Blackthorn Security Company, Leonard had already shaken off his stiff state from earlier, and his expression didn't look abnormal as he talked about the recently discovered house that Lenivus rented before. "Is that so? He never told me about it before." Megos replied normally, creasing her eyebrows slightly. Then, she grabbed her blonde hair, pulled out a handful, and casually threw it into the trash can by the side. Leonard was dumbfounded. He gulped with difficulty, and his palms were full of cold sweat once again. Klein walked up the stairs to the second floor with the blood vessel thief in his left hand. He looked at the door that led to the Nighthawk's break room, where Dunn Smith stood silently in his black windbreaker. His eyes were gray and deep, just like when they had first met. "Reintroducing myself, Nighthawk, Dunn Smith." The voice of the past sounded in Klein's ears as the scene of Dunn by Kenley's corpse flashed in his head. There was blood all over his mouth. He suddenly fell silent and walked over. He lifted his left hand and said, "Captain, I picked sealed artifact 2 to 105. I plan on letting Leonard use it." Dunn nodded slightly. He didn't ask why but turned and pointed at his office as he spoke. "The Holy Cathedral sent a telegram. They said that they'll gather a team of strong Beyonders immediately and asked us to stall for as much time as possible and try to wait. About those coincidences, they didn't give any reply. I think they don't have any conclusions as of yet. Or perhaps, the person who handles the telegrams doesn't know the actual situation and has no way to make guesses. You know, we have to make the best use of time. Telegrams can't be too long. Yes. Klein nodded. He got closer to the partition and looked outside as he said, "How's the situation?" "Nothing strange as of yet." Dunn looked down at the Saint's ash box in his left hand. Seeing how Leonard and Megos were having a good time chatting, Klein didn't interrupt them. He retreated to the Nighthawk's recreation room and faced Dunn with the corridor in between them. Just then, Dunn suddenly let out a self-deprecating laugh. "I forgot something." "What is it?" Klein replied, puzzled. Dunn looked sideways at him and said, "Daly told me to explain myself to you." "Huh?" Klein was stunned, as he couldn't quite understand what the captain meant. After 2 seconds, before Dunn could reply, he suddenly understood. Madame Daly didn't reply immediately because she thought it was unnecessary. She had forwarded the matter to the captain and let him explain himself. That means that there isn't anything serious with the captain. At this critical point, Klein suddenly felt a surge of joy erupt inside of him. Chapter 207, 207 Dunn sighed. "I did want to send you away back then since I was going to do something that involves the secrets of the church and the Nighthawks. But Kenley's death left my mind in chaos. At that moment, all I could think of was a clumsy excuse, thus, giving you the opportunity to witness what I was doing." "What secret is that?" Klein pressed, now being more at ease. He had almost forgotten about the threat of the evil god's son, or the existence of a legendary creature outside. Dunn weighed his words and said, "There might be a law in mysticism. Even though I haven't read many books, I'm still aware of what a law means. This law is called Law of Beyonder Characteristics Indestructibility. The characteristics of a beyonder is never destroyed or reduced. It's only passed from one carrier to the next." Klein's eyes opened wide. He suddenly came to a realization and asked thoughtfully, "For example, the sealed artifacts, mysterious objects, or a potion's main ingredients that are left behind by beyonders who have lost control?" "Correct." Dunn nodded solemnly. "This isn't only the case for beyonders who lose control, it's also the same for normal beyonders after they die." "The same." Klein mulled over Dunn's description, now having a faint idea of what the captain was doing. He suddenly recalled when the suited clown died. He recalled the blue, thumb-sized blood sphere that was suspended beside the corpse of the suited clown. Fry's explanation had been that there would always be strange transformations after a beyonder died. Dunn continued with his deep gray eyes, "But what's different about beyonders who lose control is that a beyonder who dies normally won't leave behind ingredients or objects. They're equivalent to a potion that corresponds to their sequences, except that they're lacking a certain amount of supplementary ingredients." Equivalent to potions. Equivalent to potions. Klein squinted as a flash of inspiration went through his mind. The endless darkness in his mind was illuminated in that instant. He suddenly understood many things, figuring out why the beyonder pathways wouldn't be broken, even if the creatures used as main ingredients were going extinct. Apart from using substitutes, one could also simply use the remains of beyonders. That should also be the reason why they only handed out complete potions at the higher sequences. Another reason is to prevent the formula from being revealed to people adept at divination or mediumship rituals. Many guesses went through Klein's mind. Dunn looked at the recreation room and explained in a deep voice, "A few years ago." "Well, I can't exactly remember just exactly how many years it was, but I wasn't the captain of the Nighthawks back then. I unexpectedly realized this problem, and after interacting with Daly, who had just become a beyonder, I immediately sent a report to the Holy Cathedral. The Holy Cathedral told me to keep it a secret and gave me 2 choices. That's also the reason why it's me, and not Daly, who's explaining this to you. Whoever exposes this is responsible for it. The first choice was to pretend to know nothing, just like a large number of Nighthawk captains and deacons, and allow the Holy Cathedral to continue dealing with the remains of beyonders who died through normal means. The second was for them to give me a unique, simple ritual and the corresponding techniques. It would allow me to temporarily consume the items produced by the unique characteristics within a limited period of time. Well, this is only suitable for sequences of the same pathway at my level or lower. This would augment my Beyonder characteristics, and I would also become more powerful. In terms of abilities regarding dreams, my powers now are not too different from a sequence SXS. That's also the reason why I dared to deal with Madame Sharon. So that's why. To think that something like this exists. Klein slowly exhaled. He finally understood why he couldn't come up with a logical explanation despite his best efforts. That was because he didn't have all the relevant information and was unable to fill in the blanks. Yes, this does match the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility. Would consuming these characteristics cause a qualitative change in the captain by constantly accumulating them? Klein allowed his mind to wander. After glancing at him, Dunn let out a bitter smile. I chose the second option, but not because I wanted to become more powerful. If I wanted to become more powerful, quickly digesting a potion and receiving an advancement is the best and most direct way. Yes, Klein agreed sincerely. Consolidating the characteristics of the potions of the same sequence will increase the risk of losing control at the same time as it improves your abilities, right? Dunn shook his head solemnly. No, these are the remains of normal Beyonders and not Beyonders who have lost control. Well, after I came to know of the acting method, I realized that it would increase the difficulty of digesting the potion. Then why do you still continue? Klein asked in shock. Dunn placed his hand into his pocket, intending to take out his pipe, only to find that he had left it in his office. He shook his head and let out a self-deprecating smile. I just said that becoming more powerful isn't the reason why I consume their remains. Having said that, he paused, his eyes wandering to the blue flicker of the gas lamp opposite where he was standing. They were all my partners. We've gone through many things together. We've dealt with monsters in the darkness and insane heretics together. Some of them have saved me, and I've saved quite a number of them. We walked together in the silent night. We fought together in battles that aren't visible to the general public. We faced danger together. We had each other's backs. I really can't bear to part with them. I remember the lad, Hit. He broke into tears the first time we went on a dangerous mission. I remember Adelaide, he was Roseanne's father. He once blocked an evil curse for me with his arm. I remember the lady, Dwayne, and her warm temperament which was like the dawn. She would always silently record the things we encountered. I remember Kenley being someone who knew how to do many things like play the 7-string guitar, sing, tell stories, even though he wasn't tall. He was more like a poet than Leonard. I miss them very much. I hope to continue fighting with them, to continue dealing with the monsters in the darkness, to deal with the crazy heretics, to protect Tinjin City with them. Thus, I chose to consume their remains. Dunn's gray eyes seemed to flicker. His reliable and dependable persona broke down considerably at that moment. His lips arched upward slightly as he continued, "They're still with me in my dreams. Adelaide loves to read, and he often reads at the solarium. He often tells me to discipline Roseanne and get her to mature faster, to the point that Roseanne complains about me becoming more and more like her father and has become scared of me. Hit is a person who cannot sit still and has to hunt in the forest every day. Dwayne always stands by the window of her bedroom and watches us chat. Kenley, who recently joined, created his own 7-string guitar and sings while strumming it. I really miss them. Captain." Klein subconsciously muttered. His eyes became blurred and watery. He couldn't help but rub his eyes and curse in his heart. Fuck. Captain, you're making me cry, but I finally understand the reason for the captain's slow progress despite using the acting method. Klein let out a silent sigh. Unfortunately, old Neil died after losing control. Otherwise, he would have brought along much joy to us. Dunn retracted his gaze. He lowered his head and massaged the bridge of his nose. A few seconds later, he lifted his head and let out a bitter smile. This is a selfish decision. I don't know what the true wishes of Adelaide, Kenley, and the rest were, and, thus, selfishly made a decision for them. I truly am a selfish person. No. Klein shook his head. On the sofa in the receptionist area, Leonard watched Megos pull out clumps of her hair as his expression became more and more rigid. Megos seemed increasingly restless as she constantly picked up the glass for a mouthful of water. She looked at Leonard with a contorted expression. I don't know why, but I suddenly feel a little unwell. Leonard Mitchell was about to reply when he suddenly saw Megos reach for her face. She clawed out a piece of flesh, a long piece of flesh, a piece of flesh stained with blood. My face is a little itchy. Megos smiled, a little embarrassed. The edge of her lip spread to where her cheekbones were, revealing a row of white teeth and bright red gums. Fuck. Leonard cursed out silently. He felt that the situation was worsening way too quickly. His lips quivering, Leonard turned to listen as his expression immediately turned steely green. He forced a smile and apologized to Megos, who was clawing out pieces of her flesh. I need to use the bathroom. Al, right. Megos' tone became ethereal. She rubbed her belly and said, My child is a little restless. Leonard didn't reply. He hastened his footsteps and approached the partition. After entering the corridor, Leonard stared deeply at the box of ash in Dunn Smith's hands and exhaled in exasperation. Following that, his expression turned firm. Captain, I'm afraid that it's too late. We have to deal with Megos and her baby immediately. Otherwise, the whole of Tingen will suffer terrible losses. This isn't something that can be avoided just by evacuating the citizens around us. I know that you've already sent such a telegram. Dunn knitted his eyebrows and asked, unusually stern, Are you sure that the situation has worsened to such an extent? Yes. In no more than 3 minutes, Megos will undergo a mutation, and her child will descend upon us, Leonard said with a certain tone. At the same time, he glanced at the thick, large blood vessel wrapped around Klein's hand and said, Sealed artifact 2-105? Let me use it. I can better utilize its abilities. All right. Klein didn't hesitate to hand the blood vessel thief over to Leonard. That was something he intended to do so from the beginning. At that moment, Dunn tugged at his collar and patted down his windbreaker. He spoke with a determined tone, I'll head out with St. Selena's ashes first. Come out after 10 seconds, remember, come out only after you finish counting to 10. Then, regardless of my condition, direct your strongest attacks at Megos and her baby without wasting any time. With that said, he turned around and walked towards the partition with the urn of ashes. Captain. Klein let out a shout, his lips dry. Captain. Leonard also shouted. Dunn stopped and looked back. He had a gentle expression as he said with his mellow voice, Don't worry about me. I'm not alone. Adelaide, Dwayne, Hit, and Kenley are all fighting alongside me, no matter what kind of danger I face. He paused for a moment before speaking, his gray eyes gentle. There's no need to be too nervous as well. We're guarding Tingen City. His lips arched upwards, forming his usual smile. After saying those words, he didn't stay any longer. He stepped through the partition, his black windbreaker following behind him. Captain. Klein and Leonard shouted at the same time, their tears falling uncontrollably, but Dunn didn't slow down. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness. Chapter 208 Beep. 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 The telegram set up in the captain's office suddenly came to life, seemingly having received a new telegram. But Klein and Leonard couldn't be distracted. They were counting the movements of the second hand on the clock as their red eyes welled up with tears. 10, 9. 8. Just then, Dunn Smith carried the silver, bone-like square box into the reception hall with a solemn expression. Megos, who was pulling out clump after clump of blonde hair, tore a wound that was deep enough to show her bones. It was as though she was triggered by something. She suddenly stood and pointed at Dunn Smith in his black windbreaker. She shrieked, "You want to kill my child! You want to kill my child!" Boom! The shrill and terrifying voice reverberated. Klein felt like he was being struck in the head with a sledgehammer. He suddenly forgot to count as he had a headache and felt dizzy. His vision went red, and there seemed to be liquid flowing from the tip of his nose. He subconsciously looked sideways, and he saw the corner of Leonard Mitchell's eyes. The tip of his nose and the corners of his lips were covered in fresh blood. His face was extremely pale, and his body was wavering as though he was about to fall. "I'm probably in the same state." Klein reined back his thoughts and continued to count in silence as he skipped 2 numbers. 5, 4. Struck by the terrifyingly sharp voice, Dunn Smith's deep gray eyes were filled with red veins. Every single strand was crystal clear. The blood vessels in his face protruded out as well, every one of them like a poisonous snake. There was also a gurgle as red liquid flowed out of his ears as well. Despite that, he did feel dizzy. Other than his right hand pausing, his strong willpower drove him to press down on Saint Selena's urn and open the lid. Inside the box, there was deep darkness. In the darkness, there was fine resplendent sand. The scene was magically beautiful, just like a starry night being stored in a box. The surroundings suddenly became dark, and the darkness engulfed the entire reception hall. In the air, there were countless black, cold, and smooth threads were floating. They surged towards Megos and entangled her almost instantly. It wasn't like a spider web, but more like the tentacles of some unknown creature. Megos had already torn out her right eyeball. It hung by a thin cord of flesh underneath her eye socket. She stared at Dunn Smith with hatred as she roared, "You must die." Bang! Dunn was cast away by a formless force and slammed heavily into the wall opposite. The wall cracked, and bricks were thrown up. He spat a mouthful of fresh blood onto the ground, but both his hands were still tightly holding onto Saint Selena's urn. He held on to it for dear life and kept it from falling to the ground. Those countless black, cold, and smooth threads tightened and bound Megos firmly to the spot. No matter how much blight-tainted flames rose up suddenly, or how her skin began to secrete a liquid that smelt like brimstone, neither of those defenses dealt any damage to the threads holding onto her. 3, 2, 1. Klein and Leonard dashed out through the partition simultaneously. One of them was holding onto a warm thin gold slice, and the other had already aimed his 5 fingers with the blood vessel thief wound around his left wrist at Megos. Megos, who no longer looked human, struggled as flesh protruded from both sides of her shoulders. They were a mixture of blood vessels and green veins, round like a child's head. Above the 2 heads, cracks rapidly spread and seemingly turned into a pair of eyes. Megos suddenly noticed danger approaching, and she opened her mouth. The corner of her lips cracked all the way up to her ears. She was going to deal the blaspheme curse to every enemy that attempted to harm her child. At that moment, Leonard clenched his left hand into a fist as his wrist made a half-turn. His pale face turned livid, and the vessels protruded like bunch of tiny poisonous worms. Megos' blaspheme curse was left stuck in her throat as it came to a sudden halt. She seemed to have lost the ability to speak and the ability to evoke curses. Klein seized the opportunity and muttered an ancient Hermes word in a deep voice. "Light. I want light, and there will be light." He suddenly felt the thin gold slice that was covered in mysterious patterns become boiling hot as he saw it emit a blinding light, as though it had become a miniature sun. Right on the heels of that, Klein injected more than half his spirituality into it and threw the flaring sun charm towards the restrained Megos. The reception hall instantly turned transparent as darkness and gloominess vanished simultaneously. The black fine threads that entangled Megos shrank as though they were instinctively avoiding something. But before Megos obtained her freedom, she already saw the sunlight. At some point in the fight, a hole had ruptured in the ceiling of the Blackthorn Security Company, and the hole went all the way to the rooftop of the third floor. The bright blue sky and glaring sunlight shined through simultaneously. The thin gold slice combined with the sunlight above Megos and immediately expanded in size. It went from a spherical light to a sphere with countless flames spiraling around it. Rumble. The entire building shook vigorously, and the glass windows on the nearby streets shattered. However, the power of the spherical light concentrated its might at its core, without dissipating much. It enveloped Megos, and the light was so glaring that Klein, Dunn, and Leonard couldn't open their eyes. Klein held back his tears and looked through squinted eyes. He saw that the light had dispersed, but the flames were still soaring. Among them, there were many black ashes dancing in the air. Megos and the baby in her stomach were nowhere to be seen. Just like the coffee table, water glass, newspaper, and sofa in the area. Is it over? Did we finish the son of an evil god before it descended upon this world, taking his mother out at the same time? Klein still couldn't believe it. His experience of playing video games told him that the final boss couldn't be taken care of so easily. Suddenly, he felt goosebumps all over. His clown instincts told him that there was extreme danger approaching. Without thinking, Klein rolled to the left abruptly. Just then, a long arm with an extremely sharp white bone blade cleaved the spot, seemingly out of nowhere. The monstrosity had an abnormal beauty, and it floated in midair. It was unbelievably fast and almost impossible to dodge its attacks. Whoosh! Klein's clothing on the right side of his chest was ripped apart, his skin ruptured, and his flesh, along with his bones, was split into two. The wound was so deep that he could almost see one of his lungs. If it wasn't because he sensed danger approaching beforehand and dodged in time, that slash would have sliced him in half. But, even so, Klein slowed down. Extreme pain filled his head and scattered his consciousness. At the end of the white bone blade, a figure rapidly flew out. If it wasn't for the bump on its stomach, perhaps no one could identify it as Megos. Her hair and dress had been burned entirely. The skin on her face and body was charred black and was peeling off, flake after flake. Her nose had melted, leaving only two small black holes behind. Her eyeballs were nowhere to be seen, and there were faint white flames dancing in the empty sockets. The two heads that had popped up from both sides of Megos' shoulders had been burned away. Her left arm had become the white bone blade that she was holding. It looked demonic, yet holy. Creak. As the ground shook, Megos ignored Dunn and Leonard, as well as the black, cold, and smooth fine threads that were hurtling towards her again. She phased over to Klein, who had come to a stop after rolling away. She aimed the white bone blade at Klein's neck and was about to slash down. Suddenly, she heard a voice that contained a rich blasphemous tone. Submit. Leonard lifted his left hand and aimed his palm at Megos. The sealed artifact 2-105 wrapped around his wrist had turned from a thick pale, blood-tainted blood vessel into a crimson intestine that had expanded to the point that it looked ready to explode. With the aid of the blood vessel thief, Leonard had successfully stolen Megos' blaspheme curse and was attempting to use her power to seize control of her. Only an ability at her level was effective. Under the influence of the blaspheme curse, Megos bent her waist, and her knees were constantly trembling. Her motions came to a halt as the surrounding black threads surrounded her as though they had found a delicious prey. Klein also took the opportunity to roll in the opposite direction, leaving a trail of fresh crimson blood behind him. However, he got some reprieve from his extreme pain and reached his hand into his pocket. He took out the last flaring sun charm. He took the opportunity when Megos was stationary to finish her off, once and for all. If she were to hold out until the baby was born, the outcome would be beyond their imagination. Boom! Megos' head exploded on its own. Her charred skin and flesh flew in all directions. But her headless body seized the opportunity to shake off the effect of the blaspheme curse. Boom! Migos' charred body transformed into a projectile that shot towards Leonard. Since the blaspheme curse had been forcefully disrupted, Leonard was temporarily frozen on the spot. At that moment, Dunn Smith was still holding onto Saint Selena's urn tightly. His face was abnormally pale, and the black, cold threads that were created was still short of surrounding Migos. Creak! Migos slammed into Leonard, throwing him to the wall. The wall collapsed from the impact. Leonard's bones cracked, and there was blood spewing out from his mouth incessantly. Without even having the urge to struggle, he fainted instantly. Migos raised her white bone blade, but the countless black threads that emanated from Saint Selena's urn enveloped her again and was about to bind her to the ground. Without the luxury of time to mind his injuries, Klein quickly took out the thin charm. Just as he was going to recite the ancient Hermes incantation, something suddenly sounded in the deep, dark, yet quiet room. Wah! It was the cry of a baby. Chapter 209 Wah! The baby in Migos' stomach cried. It squirmed, wanting to come into this world in a bid to help its mother escape from her predicament. The black, cold, and smooth threads appeared to suffer a shock as they seemed to be suppressed by an invisible power which led to their retreat backward. Wah! Dunn and Klein became dizzy at the same time. They felt their throats contract involuntarily as their contracting air passages instantly stifled them. Crimson liquid flowed from their nostrils, their eyes, and their ears. All of their capillaries seemed to have ruptured. If it wasn't for the fact that Klein had undergone the torture of hearing the mutterings and ravings every time he headed to the world above the grey fog, as well as Dunn holding on to the ashes of Saint Selena, they definitely would have fainted on the spot, just like Leonard Mitchell. Migos' headless body turned over and looked at Klein, who saw her charred skin and flesh peeling to the ground, and the holy, yet evil white bone blade. Having escaped its influence thanks to his rich experience, Klein immediately felt his scalp tingle and forgot about the pain in his right chest. He seemed to witness his enemy charge towards him maniacally, not giving him any time to recite the incantation, infuse spirituality, and throw out the flaring sun charm. Just as he was about to dodge the attack, Klein saw Migos suddenly pause. He saw Dunn Smith's black windbreaker fluttering, and the captain diagonally across him had buried his head. There were multiple thick twitching objects on his back as if they were venomous snakes or tentacles, or monsters. Dunn was using his abilities as a nightmare to forcefully impede Migos' movements. Bam! 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 With a mere struggle from Migos, the thick tentacle-like objects that protruded from Dunn's back exploded at the same time. A large amount of blood splattered out, covering every corner of the room like rain. Dunn wasn't disappointed at the result, for the blood had been absorbed by the black threads created by Saint Selena's ashes. They had been absorbed. The countless cold, smooth, tentacle-like threads entered a frenzy. They swarmed forward and bound Migos tightly, wrapping themselves around her bulging, squirming stomach. An opportunity. Klein was as nervous as he was excited. He prepared to shout the ancient Hermes word for light. Wah! 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 The cries of a baby could be heard once again, more frequent, and more incessant this time around. The countless black threads suddenly came to a pause, retreating and trembling again as if they had all been struck by lightning. Dunn's expression changed when he realized that Migos was about to free herself. Without hesitation, he retracted his right palm, formed a claw, and stabbed it into his own chest, his left chest. He quickly pulled out his right hand, his fingers holding a bloody heart tightly. It was a still-beating heart that brought with it the sereneness of the night and a dream. Captain. Klein watched helplessly as Dunn Smith stuffed the heart into the urn containing Saint Selena's ashes. His vision quickly blurred. Whoosh! 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 Crying that sounded like a late-night nightmare resounded. The countless cold and serene threads once again resumed their efforts as they wrapped themselves tightly around Migos. This time, they didn't loosen their bindings despite the cries coming from the baby in Migos' stomach. In fact, they even sealed the terrifying sounds within the body. Klein's tears fell together with his blood. He uttered a simple Hermes term in a deep voice, light. The light that illuminates the darkness. The light that brings warmth. He infused almost all of his remaining spirituality into the thin gold piece etched with mysterious symbols, causing his mind to immediately turn blank and dizzy. Having mustered the last of his strength, Klein tossed out the flaring sun charm at Migos, who was still bound by the countless black threads. The black threads didn't retract this time, having not followed their instincts, as if they were being willed by someone. Thump. Thump. Dunn's fresh heart was still beating within the box containing Saint Selena's ashes. The sunlight once again shone in from the hole in the ceiling, shining through all 3 stories, right into the Blackthorn Security Company, as if it were a corporeal pillar. It was guided here by the flaring sun charm, and it was focused on Migos. The sunlight fused with the top of the headless monster, and then exploded like the sun. Rumble. In the burning white splendor, Klein closed his eyes. This last scene was etched deep into his mind. Migos' body lost its left arm, head, and multiple pieces of flesh. Its charred body crumbled instantly. The half-illusory, terrifying creature within her body no longer had the support of a physical body and couldn't complete the last stage of its transformation. It turned into a furious ball of black gas, dissolving amidst the light and flames. Rumble. The entire building shook violently, but this was only due to the released energy of the flaring sun charm. The charm was different from a normal bomb. Its powers were concentrated, yet restrained. Klein fought to stabilize his body. He opened his eyes and looked ahead a few seconds later. He saw that the walls had crumbled. He saw a charred circle where Migos once stood. Surprisingly, the floor had only melted slightly. He saw a burned, bloody placenta on the ground. He saw Dunn Smith standing on the spot, still wearing his black windbreaker. He saw the heart in the box of Saint Selena's ashes still beating slowly. He saw Leonard Mitchell lying on the opposite side. His outcome was unknown. The exhausted Klein felt elated and felt that he could still use ritualistic magic to save the captain. He felt that Migos and her baby were truly finished. No, it was more accurate to say that the latter had suffered an interruption and was exorcised. At that moment, Dunn Smith turned to look at Klein. His pale face had a warm and relaxed expression, and his voice still as mellow as it usually was. "We saved Tingen." After saying this, it was as if he had returned to the time when he was 20. He no longer appeared stern and serious as he winked at Klein with his left eye. Klein's expression froze. He saw the heart in the box of Saint Selena's ashes stop beating. It turned into a resplendent ball of light before scattering into the surroundings. He saw the captain fall backward, his arms losing their strength. It felt like the scene was made up of a series of paintings, but Klein could do nothing to stop it. Thump. The box of Saint Selena's ashes fell onto the ground, just like Klein's heart. Thud. Thud. Even though the box wasn't covered, the darkness within the box sealed the opening, preventing the resplendent sand-like ashes from falling out. The box rolled a distance away towards Klein. Dunn Smith fell to the wrecked floor, his deep gray eyes having lost all their luster. He was looking at the hole in the ceiling, the sunlight pouring down on his face. "Captain." Klein's vision blurred once again. He wanted to shout, but that word and the subsequent words were stuck in his throat. "We miss you too." At that moment, the box containing Saint Selena's ashes had rolled to his feet. Suddenly, Klein felt a pain in his chest, his pupils violently constricted as he froze in place. He looked down to see a slightly pale palm, drenched in blood, coming out the left side of his chest. Migos isn't dead. No, a new enemy. The mastermind behind the scenes. Am I going to die? Klein quickly lost his consciousness, his eyes almost losing focus. His body slumped to the side. His breathing gradually slowed and, he finally felt the palm pull back quickly. He saw a pair of brand new leather boots, and a hand reaching downward, a slightly pale hand. It grabbed the urn of Saint Selena's ashes. Klein's vision went black, and he lost all consciousness. Burned and shattered objects were scattered around in the now destroyed Blackthorn Security Company, but there wasn't a single sound, it was just like a cemetery. A few minutes later, Leonard Mitchell's body moved, his eyes opening slowly. He propped himself up with difficulty and surveyed the surroundings. He saw Dunn Smith on the ground. He also saw Klein, who had his eyes staring wide as a look of shock was plastered across his face. Dunn and Klein both had visible wounds on the left sides of their chests. No. Leonard squeezed out the word from his throat as he staggered towards Klein's corpse, that wasn't far away from Dunn. He kept checking them, going between the two repeatedly, but all he could do was accept this irreversible truth. Leonard's knees buckled as his knees plopped to the ground. His green eyes were filled with pain as tears streamed down his cheeks, washing away the blood and dust. He turned his head and listened for 2 seconds and suddenly sprawled forward. He let out an angry roar and clenched his palms into fists, and heavily pounded the floor. Thump. 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 Leonard kept tearing up as he pounded the floor. Amidst his sorrow was a feeling of clear hatred and a clear sense of self-abhorrence. Thud. 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 Leonard looked up when he heard the sounds of hurried footsteps and saw the members of the mandated punishers and the machinery hive mind that had just arrived at the scene through his blurred vision. Chapter 210. In a Tianjin suburb, there was a house with a green lawn. The house had a garden that had begun to wither at the beginning of September. Attached to the house was a crimson chimney. There was a desk next to the window in the bedroom of that house. An ordinary notebook was spread open on the table. A slightly pale hand flipped the notebook to the very first page, then it quickly flipped to the back. As the paper flipped, the rows of words appeared faintly. Regents, a member from the secret order, sold the Antigonus family's notebook as an ordinary ancient book by accident due to the influence both of weariness and illusions. It was a coincidence that made logical sense. Affected by the calling of the Antigonus family's bloodline, the notebook secretly affects its owners, one after the other. After repeated changes in ownership, it came to Tianjin. It fell into the hands of the members of the Aurora Order, Sirius Arapis and Hanas Vincent. After they flipped through the content that temporarily appeared in the notebook and copied the corresponding potion formulas, Sirius and Hanas were worried that the secret order, who were good at divination, would track them down. After discussing it, they decided to avoid the risk by selling it to another person. They didn't wait for Mr. Z's reply, perhaps because he stayed at Enmat Harbor. Through Sirius's introduction, Hanas got to know Welch McGovern from the Koei University's Department of History. Then, Hanas sold the Antigonus family's notebook to McGovern as an ordinary ancient book. Subsequently, Sirius was attracted by the treasure that was said to exist on the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range. He started to visit the Deweyville Library and research the mountain. He didn't think that there would be any problems, so he left his real address and name. That aligned with his personality. During this process, he acquainted himself with Lenivis, who was reading up on information about iron mines to set up a scam. Lenivis's hidden lunacy and swindling ability were well appreciated by Sirius. He decided to nurture him into a member of the Aurora Order. Of course, before that, an investigation was inevitable. Sirius covertly informed Lenivis about the evil ritual of praying to the true Creator to deliver his spawn into this world. But he knew that the possibility of Lenivis succeeding was very low, because the difficulty level of the ritual was very high, and the requirements were very harsh. However, the latter expressed his strong interest in the matter, tempted by the possibility of obtaining a deity's approval. He planned to complete the ritual simultaneously as he carried out the plans of establishing his steelworks company. The cunning Lenivis could tell that there was something fishy about Sirius Arapis. But for his personal goal, he didn't expose him. He visited Hudyujin in the asylum once again. They had known each other long ago, and they knew about their respective situations. After a dark divination, the Antigonus family's notebook was awakened fully. Welch and his classmate died. The lucky survivor, Klein Moretti, sent it to Ray Bieber's house under the influence of the notebook. It was a destined ending. Many rows were scribbled off and new content followed. For some baffling reason, and a lack of sufficient explanations, Klein didn't commit suicide after that and somehow managed to stay alive. In the Nighthawks investigation of Welch's case that followed, he met Dunn Smith and joined the Nighthawks. Although it had already exceeded in Sangwill's description, it didn't affect the development of the story. Bacchus and his brothers were down on their luck. They lost their last chip at the gambling tables and were drowning in debt. In a bid to obtain money, they decided to kidnap and blackmail the somewhat wealthy individuals. When they were looking for their final hideout, they chanced upon the room opposite Ray Bieber's apartment. By then, Ray Bieber was already seduced by the power offered by the Antigonus family's notebook. He hoped to digest the gift left behind by his ancestors. However, he was in a semi-insane state, and he couldn't make the best and safest choice. He abandoned his dead mother, but he continued remaining in Tingen City. He only found a more elusive spot to carry out his digestion ritual. It was truly pathetic. If he had been slightly smarter, the story could have become even more complicated, but his decision was made based on his instincts and his poor state of mind. Bacchus and company purchased weapons and took the youngest son, Elliot, of the tobacco merchant, Viceroy, and held him for ransom. Finally, they successfully carried out the abduction and took Elliot back to the apartment opposite Ray Bieber's. Viceroy's butler was entrusted with looking for help from a security company. Because of Welch's mysterious death, security companies were short on hands. Klee chanced upon a deliverman and happened to discover the existence of the Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard Mitchell and Klein accepted the job. Relying on their beyonder powers, they quickly saved the merchant's son. Regrettably, Klein didn't immediately realize that clues to the Antigonus family's notebook were in the apartment opposite them. However, his spirituality reminded him in his dream. As such, the Tingen Nighthawks discovered corresponding clues. Sealed artifact 2-049 arrived in Tingen. With the aid of the Antigonus family's puppet, Dunn Smith led the Nighthawks to find Ray Bieber before interrupting his digestion procedure. Ray Bieber became a monster, and the situation was out of control. In the end, the Nighthawks skillfully worked together and took care of Monster Bieber, but they immediately faced the attack of a member from the secret order. More rows were scribbled away again, and the original content was impossible to read. Leonard Mitchell, who possesses a secret, was going to end the situation. Before he could, Klein, who was supposed to be doomed, killed the Sequence 7 member from the secret order in an inexplicable manner. That didn't affect the development of the story. Dunn Smith got in touch with the Antigonus family's notebook and flipped through its content. From that point onwards, he was secretly tainted. Having finished with all his preparations, Lenivus beguiled Hudyujin and used him to assist in his ritual. They tricked Lenivus's fiancée, Megos, to become the vessel that would carry the true creator's spawn. Lenivus had almost no possibility of success. The most serious problem was that even though Megos would be protected by the ritual's power, she wouldn't be able to withstand the sexual intercourse with the illusory projection of a deity. It would cost her life on the altar. At that moment, the kind in Sangwill helped Lenivus in secret. He split off half a piece of a descendant of Death's characteristic that he obtained and planted it into Megos' body ahead of time. Hudyujin made Megos enter a semi-unconscious state and convinced her that the true creator's illusory projection was Lenivus. Nourished by the accumulated resentment, gloominess, and oppression of the factory district, the ritual succeeded. Megos was pregnant with the true creator's spawn. The deity saw through the coincidences, but since he wished to break through the shackles placed on him by the 7 deities, he didn't refuse. Hood Eugen was contaminated. After the ritual succeeded, the mad Lenivus regained his rationality. He clearly knew that if the deity's spawn was to descend into the world, Lenivus, himself, would become one of the sacrificial offerings. How could a mortal be the father of a deity's son? This was blasphemy of the highest order. Lenivus decided to leave Tingen ahead of time and left clues to the Nighthawks, the mandated punishers, and the machinery hive mind so that they could resolve the repercussions of his actions. There was ultimately a price needed for lunacy. However, Lenivus didn't write the letter directly to the Beyonder squads. He thought it would make him look stupid. He decided to leave the letter in one of the houses that he rented. He pretended to be playing a game with the Beyonders from official bodies. As such, he didn't bring up Hood Eugen's contamination and brought with him everything that he had obtained. Just in case, he informed Sirius Arapis in the safest way he could. The latter didn't quite believe him, but he could faintly feel the possibility of success. Selena would accidentally chanced upon the real magic mirror divination incantation from her mysticism teacher, Hannas Vincent. Her bold attempt was interrupted by Klein Moretti by coincidence. The latter successfully resolved this supernatural incident that might have caused serious casualties. The Nighthawks then investigated Hannas Vincent, who had recently been awarded. Therefore, Dunn Smith coincidentally saw a clear image of the true creator in his dream and suffered severe injuries. However, he wasn't contaminated because of what happened. That would have been noticed by the upper echelons of the Nighthawks. The injury made Dunn Smith's contamination by the Antigonus family notebook worsen. His absent-mindedness and forgetfulness worsened, and he was getting closer and closer to satisfying Insangwil's requirements. Many rows were scribbled away again. Seriously unbelievable. Klein Moretti noticed Insangwil's secret influence and saw the crimson chimney. This is because he was reminded by the teacher from the Koei University's Department of History, Azik. He possesses many secrets. But even so, it's astounding enough for Klein to discover actual clues. It's unexplainable. Regardless of the reason, Insangwil continued to act, and the story continues. Klein coincidentally ran into Sirius at the library and had no choice but to kill him. Hence, the clues leading to Lenivus were abruptly severed, and the discovery of the problem was delayed. Klein met Megos, but his spirituality stopped him from observing her closely. However, he didn't notice the subtle abnormality. That is logical. Our stories aren't made up randomly. He searched for the red chimney, but he always opted for a route that didn't include his target. Maybe in another 2 or 3 months, when he was on the last batch, he would find the real red chimney house. Rows and rows of writings were scribbled away, more than all of the previous rows added together. Dunn Smith's problem was alleviated. His condition obviously became better. He actually mastered that acting method. And this was taught to him by Klein Moretti, who found inspiration from Daily Simone and Old Neil's example. No, Insangwil didn't believe that, but he could only change his original plans slightly. New elements in the story came to play. Azik decided to go to Backlund in search of his lost memories. It wasn't long until Klein and Dunn found clues from Hood Eugen. In order to ensure that Tingen City's Conservative Party and New Party would be in complete opposition, Madame Sharon, who wanted to vent the accumulated madness after her transformation, decided to take the risk and murder Member of Parliament John Maynard. Her motive wasn't strong enough, but she took action anyway. There are always times when people are not clear-minded enough, and she happened to be in that stage. Besides, she was confident that she wouldn't be discovered. Maynard's wife found the Blackthorn Security Company through the tobacco merchant, Vicroy. They didn't disappoint her, and they quickly found Madame Sharon's abnormality. Dunn Smith, who possessed power that was close to Sequence 6, decided to take action first. He passed the sealed artifact 3-0271 to Kenley. When the two of them and Klein returned to Madame Sharon's residence, Dunn attempted to pull her into a dream to control her from a distance. It was a good plan, but, unfortunately, Madame Sharon happened to have the statue of the primordial demoness by her side. Hence, the Nighthawk's plan failed. Kenley reflected himself in the mirror due to his nervousness and saw himself. Madame Sharon was taken care of while Kenley died. Dunn blamed himself and consumed Kenley's beyonder characteristic as he usually did. His digestion procedure was interrupted as a result and was delayed. As such, his mental state became unstable. Under the circumstances, Leonard and Klein noticed the letter left behind by Lenivus. Megos received a baffling summoning and arrived at Zutland Street. She entered the Blackthorn Security Company, and the baby in her stomach was at a critical point in its development. It couldn't stop her urges. Dunn made a detailed plan, a plan that was right, but he made one mistake. If he steeled his resolve to lure Megos behind Cheney's gate, he would have stood a chance with the aid of the environment and the items present. If he wanted to wait for backup, he definitely shouldn't have just taken St. Selena's urn out. Unfortunately, Dunn's mind wasn't in the right place due to recent events, and he didn't think of the most critical point. A deity's son would be able to feel the threat of the saint's urn. Hence, it was triggered and started to absorb its mother's strength in a bid to be born ahead of time, even though it wasn't exactly ready. Azek was in Backlund, but he wasn't a planeswalker, so he couldn't rush back in such short notice. A few rows were scribbled away. Megos became a monster, and the fight began. With the aid of the Saint's Urn, Blood Vessel Thief, and 2 high-level charms that strangely appeared, Megos died and the deity's son was exorcised. Dunn Smith died as a result, and the power of St. Selena's ashes was severely damaged as well. That went perfectly within Sangwill's intentions. Sangwill didn't get a chance to showcase himself, but it didn't hinder him from achieving his goal. He killed Klein Moretti, the fellow who kept disrupting his plans, and he took away St. Selena's ashes. Sangwill set up a ritual with the remaining half of the characteristic of Death's descendant. He consumed St. Selena's ashes and successfully advanced from Sequence 5 of the Death Sequence pathway, Gatekeeper, to Sequence 4 of the Evernight Sequence pathway, Nightwatcher. As such, he received godhood characteristics and became a demigod. The sun continues to shine brilliantly on the land. Nearly no one in Tingen City realized how they narrowly escaped a huge disaster. Monster Adamasol would be left very confused about it. The notebook was flipped to the last page. A middle-aged man that was holding onto the book had dark blonde hair, a dark blue eye that was nearly black, a tall nose, and tightly pursed lips. His facial features were like that of a statue and didn't have a single wrinkle. He held a classic quill with his slightly pale hand and wrote a line clearly without dipping into any ink. He ended with a simple sentence. Tingen's story ends here. The papers rustled as he closed the book, leaving only a brown cover.